Welcome, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm Daphne, a caseworker at LCH. I'm joined today by Maria from the Domestic Violence Center of Chester County. Hello, Maria.
Hi, good afternoon.
Today is August the 30th, and it's National Grief Awareness Day. We wanted to honor today's designated day by chatting about how to support someone you know who might be experiencing grief. Today's day is dedicated to raising awareness about how we cope with grief and how we can help others cope and end the stigma that many people have about those that are grieving. Parts of this conversation might be difficult to hear or bring up difficult, painful memories. Please know as you're watching this that there is support available if you need it. Let's start with, how does grief differ from sadness or depression, Maria?
So that is a great question. I think it's often hard to differentiate, or people might find it difficult, like, am I sad or is it considered depression? What does that look like? So being sad is actually often caused by a specific event, something that is like normal, healthy, well past. Depression often takes more serious like intervention, and that could be seeing someone, that could be medication, that could be a combination of both. And whatever those are, like, that's totally to be respected and to be acknowledged. And it's okay to not be okay. It's just not okay to stay there. So you just need to make sure that you're reaching out to whomever your support system is to make sure that you get the help that you need, and making sure that we get you back to being yourself, your true self.
Yeah, and loss doesn't just mean the death of a loved one. It can be the end of a relationship, job loss. It could be loss of independence through a disability. So they're all different types of losses.
Yes, and I'm super glad you acknowledge that, because I think a lot of people think and associate grief to just being the death of a loved one. And whenever grief is brought up, people are like, oh, I've never been through that. I don't understand that, or might not quite get that. But you more than likely have been through some form of traumatic event or some form of grieving process, and you might not even realize that, like even divorce, even like joyful griefs or good griefs, like a new baby, you're grieving the old you, or like being a new parent or a new job, you're grieving the old process, and in comes the new process, how to live the new normal of what that'll now look like in your life.
Right, and the important thing that is, if you're grieving for a long time, and you are the person who determines whether it's long or not, right? It's all relative.
Yes.
But if it's disrupting your life, or if you're struggling to cope, you should get help.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Please. And by all means, there's no shame in asking for help or acknowledging that you need help. With depression comes the chemical imbalance that it is, that we just need to make sure we regulate. And however that looks like for you, we want to make sure that we support you in doing that.
And how does grief look like for a domestic violence survivor?
So I'm very glad you specifically asked that, because I think that it's not something that's often brought up. I think people tend to think that it's situational because of the situation. And once a survivor escapes their situation, then their grief or their depression or their heartbreak just kind of dissipates or goes away. And that's not true. And so we need to work, now that the immediate and the emergent has been handled, now we need to work with what the rest of it looks like, what the rest of your life is now going to look like, what your new normal is going to look like. And so we have to first acknowledge that there is a grief process with saying goodbye to the toxic and abusive relationship. And I think that that's something a lot of people may even feel guilty acknowledging, just because there were some good times, and love bombing is real. And the false reality or the false narrative that was painted for so long was also very real, whether you were so used to faking it for so long that you believed it. All of those things have to be recognized, and then even recognizing the new you outside of no longer being defined as a victim. You're no longer a victim, you are a survivor. And so even acknowledging like the emotions that come with that and the roller coaster that comes with that, all of which are more than okay, and all of which are super normal. It's just something that you deserve to talk about, because there's healing in being able to talk about it and really working through that.
And it must be very tough for the survivor. I mean, sometimes they lose their home.
Yes.
Those things that are familiar to them. Sometimes they lose friends and
Yes.
even family. because of the situation. And I imagine that it must be very hard for them to understand their feelings, these mixed feelings.
Yes.
Of, missing the companionship, if not the person itself who was abusive, having feelings of loneliness. And yeah, so you would expect them to just feel happiness, joy, because now, they've eliminated this abuse from their life, and now they can move forward. There's newfound freedom, but that's not always the case.
Yes. And it's always a process. Like, we know that, yes, like while the immediate and the emergent, like of the situation and the life and death, literally being removed out of their life has caused this new, like, I can breathe again. There's still a certain level of grief that comes with like grieving what once was. There was a lot of stability with the previous abuser, with the previous partner, just like you were saying, financial, physical, emotional, all of which were met by that person, or that you thought were being met by that person. And so even learning to deal with like breaking that false narrative and now dealing with what the new normal is, and grieving what once was and what now is, like all of that is a process, and that's okay.
And how about children living in violent households? Do they experience some level of grief as well?
Unfortunately, yes. I think that especially when they're younger, people think, oh, they don't know, or they don't hear it. But even babies feel it. They feel it. They can cry when they hear the room getting heightened, the tension in the room. So even just learning to grieve what once was, again, and what maybe was their stability of what their home was, or their home life was, or mommy and daddy in the home, or, stepdaddy and mommy, or stepmommy and daddy. And so now what their new normal is, and prayerfully, if it's not that they lost someone to passing away due to domestic violence, but if and when the loss of a parent, the loss of a guardian, or even the decision of your parent being strong enough to leave an abusive situation. I mean, all of the emotions that come with that, and children may know but not know at the same time. And so they don't know that you're leaving an abusive situation. They just know that mommy and daddy are no longer together, or now I live with grandma, or, now I live with an aunt. And so they might not necessarily even know. And so dealing with the ramifications of the interpersonal violence, a lot of the time you have children that try to get involved and break it up because they don't want to see their parent or loved one hurt. And so then they get hurt in the process. And so they can even be grieving the physical of that, or the emotional of that, or both. So there is a lot of emotions that come with the grief process, especially when it comes to dealing with children.
Yeah, I can imagine that feeling of that loss of safety, of security, of the routine, of the normal, right? Violent household. It's every single day is different. It's that you don't know what's going to happen once you walk through that door. So I can imagine it must be horrific for the children.
Exactly. I just can't even imagine dealing with all of those emotions at like a little age.
So what are some common behaviors that people who are grieving might show?
Grieving can show in tons of different ways, and in ways you may not even have realized or acknowledged. So it could be anything from like a change in appetite. You're like super hungry all the time and you just want to eat because you're trying to numb the pain and the emotions with food. That was something I definitely have struggled with in the past, and still kind of struggle with to like regulate when I'm definitely super emotional or like going through any type of grief process. Disturbance of sleep, just kind of like resting your eyes or getting like the basic sleep, but not really getting like thorough, like genuine rest. Fatigue, exhaustion, just being drained all the time. Tearfulness at any moment, just like your emotions being ready to flip a switch at any given time. Triggers that you don't even realize are really triggers, avoiding people or situations, not wanting to be in certain situations, potentially suicidal thoughts or actions, just emotions like of anger, sadness, loneliness, all of like in roller coaster, in like a roller coaster type of way where you're just like up and down all the time. Maybe just like neglecting yourself, not brushing your hair, not really wanting to take a shower, not really changing your clothes, not wanting to leave the house. Even like maybe like losing interest in your work, things that once gave you a passion just no longer give you, you just have no no desire, you're just kind of blah. Maybe even angry with yourself, at yourself, running the situation over and over, whatever the situation respectively was, and just going over what you could have done differently, what could have been better. If only I did A, B, C, and D. Maybe even being angry with your loved one, with your deceased loved one, and even angry at your God, at your respective, religious belief or whatever that may be for you. Just being like hurt, angry, frustrated, any of those things kind of are all stem or like manifest from some form of grief.
And again, if in doubt, there's always it's okay to reach out for support, whether it's medical, your primary care provider, whether it's behavioral health counseling, one-on-one counseling, whether it's reaching out to DVCCC if there's any doubt as to what you're experiencing and whether this is normal or this is something that will pass or this is something that, needs the intervention of a professional.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And even being able to recognize that is huge. I think as a generation, we've done a huge job and a huge, great job of being able to acknowledge that we need help. Mental health has become absolutely rampant in the last few years. And I think it's just homage to the fact that we can now accept that. I think the generations before, even my dad's generation was one where we just go through, we don't say anything. And that's where a lot of the unhealthy generational stuff kind of comes from, where people don't really say anything, don't ask for help, don't reach out to their community and support system. So thankfully,
but this attitude of let's just plow through this, and
exactly,
there's other worse problems in the world, and exactly. This will pass.
Essentially, you're gaslighting yourself, and so really acknowledging the fact that we need help and being courageous enough to say I am not okay, and this isn't okay, and I just need help. This is out, I can't do this. That's huge. That's just huge and speaks to your strength.
So now that we've talked about what grieving can look like, we have some questions about how to support somebody who might be experiencing grief. Are there any ways to talk to or support somebody experiencing grief or trauma without making things worse for them?
Yes, the number one key thing, if you take anything away from today, please allow this to be the number one. Please don't tell somebody you understand. My mom passed away 11 years ago. I lost my mom to cancer after a 7-year battle. And the first thing that people would tell me, even if they lost their mom or they lost their mom at an older age or a younger age, they'd be like, oh my God, I totally understand. Please do not do that. Please don't say that. It's okay if you have in the past, just because you did not know, right? We grow and we learn, and that's how we become better. And so becoming better is saying I don't understand. I will never pretend to understand. Even my friends that have since lost a parent, specifically a mom, I still don't say I understand. All I say is I can't imagine what that's like. I'm here. If you want to vent, if you want to cry, if you want to talk about it, or if you don't want to talk about it and get your mind off of it, I'm here. Please feel free to tell me all the stories about your loved one. I want to hear whatever it is, because I want to keep their legacy alive, and whatever we can do to honor them, I'm all for. But I will never, ever pretend to understand, because that is not our job. We do not understand what anybody's walking through, and it's not our job to understand. If you're trying to understand or think you get it, you're carrying something on your shoulders that wasn't meant for you to understand. So please, being supportive and being mindful of being supportive and loving someone through grief is saying I don't get it. And then acknowledging that they most likely will not know what they need or how to ask you for what they need. So even doing things like meeting them where they're at, doing somebody's laundry, making sure that they have food. After my mom passed away, we had lasagnas and casseroles for weeks on end, and they were the best, because the last thing I wanted to do was cook after I came home from work or from school. And my dad is trying to keep the household of 2 girls and trying to carry it all after he lost the love of his life. And it was a lot. And so I think just being personable, meeting somebody where they're at, that doesn't mean that you give them hundreds of dollars. We might not have that, but making sure, cooking them a meal, saving them a plate after you cook dinner for your family, being intentional about spending time with them, or acknowledging and respecting that if they don't text you, they don't reach out, they're not calling you, they may want their space. And so reaching out to them, reminding them that you're there and you love them, and then respecting their space if they do not want that right now. And that's okay. But just reminding them that you're there. That could be flowers, that could be you stopping by. That could be you commenting or sending them like an old photo of you guys together the last time you had a picture. I know for me, one of the biggest things is like people telling me stories about my mom. Sometimes I need that. Like days like today, I actually woke up like really missing my mom, and I may be like grown, but like a girl still needs her mom. And so being mindful of days like today where like I acknowledge to my friends and my support system, like, hey, I miss my mom really much, like a lot today. And then them reminding me that like, I'm going to be okay, that they're there for me, but also being respectful of the fact that like, I'm not ready for a lot of emotions today, and that's okay. So just myself being knowledgeable of that, but also you as like my support system being knowledgeable in that.
Yeah, from my own experience with grief, I know it's a natural process, of course, but it takes time.
Yes.
Sometimes it'll never go away, in the sense that you will always mourn the loss of, and you fill in the blank. We normally think of, of a loved one. It could be a pet, but it could be any array of things. But it does take time.
Yes.
It does take time, and that's fine.
Yes. And alongside, just like you said, in taking time, like it's been 11 years of my mom and I still have my days, but also acknowledging that, like, just like Daphne, just like you were saying, like grief is not linear. You're going to be great. There's going to be weeks where you're great. And then all of a sudden something hits you, a memory, a smell, a cologne, like a memory of something you used to do together. And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, especially for like our domestic violence survivors, being mindful of those things that like, that's what a trigger. You don't know when something is going to trigger you, but being like gracious to yourself that it's going to be okay and that you're going to be able to work through that, whatever that looks like. And you're going to be able to create new memories while being able to acknowledge how far you've come through something is huge too.
And again, I guess we can't stress this enough. At what point would you suggest professional help?
I think that's a really great question. I think sometimes we may not even know that. I think just being mindful of the people around us, if they're saying, hey, like, I think that it would be in your best interest to like really think about seeing somebody. But if you get to the point where you're like, you know what, I can't do this. I can't continue on like this. I don't think I can do this. Just making sure that you are reaching out to your support system. And that could be anything. That could be medical. That could be a counselor, behavioral health counselor. That could be a psychiatrist to get you on some medication to get you back to being like your happy self. And it's okay if you need medication to do that. Like it's literally, depression is literally a chemical imbalance. And a lot of the times grief goes right there hand in hand and leads into depression, and people don't even realize they're spiraling. So even acknowledging like, wow, like I'm not okay, this isn't okay. And maybe you don't necessarily feel comfortable with medication, or maybe you need to talk to someone to see if you do need medication. That is all okay. When my mom died, that was the first thing they told me, like, you have depression. I was like, you think? Who wouldn't, you know what I mean? And so just being honest about the fact. But since then, like mental health help has come a long way in 11 years, and I'm grateful for it. So I'm grateful to have the system that we do. It's definitely not perfect by all means, but it's a system that works because people are acknowledging and realizing that depression is real and suicide rates are real. I think COVID really shed a light on the world that we really live in, on the things that were already here. And so being more honest and vocal as a community to say like, I'm not okay. And it starts with us. It starts with LCH. It starts with the Domestic Violence Center. Like that's what we're here to do, to walk it with you. So please don't feel any shame in asking for help. It took me far too long after the loss of my mom to ask for help. So please don't be me and ask for help far sooner than later.
Well said. And besides one-to-one counseling, there's also support groups and like you said, reaching out to your primary care provider. Here at LCH, we have wonderful healthcare providers. We have a behavioral health team, and of course, DVCCC is another resource.
Yes, just don't ever feel like you're by yourself in it. And I think that's the greatest thing about support groups. It's like, oh, there's other people walking through this too. Like, yes, absolutely, yes. So please feel like strengthened and encouraged in the fact that you can ask for help and that the resources are out there, because so many people need them on a daily basis. And it's okay to like ask for that and to need that.
Well, thank you so much, Maria. And we want to thank everyone for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Daphne. I appreciate it. Bye, guys.
Have a great one.